I don't do this, but I did it. I actually, and I just never do this, but I went and looked at some other private investigator training videos floating around out there. And boy, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm not going to lie. I was disheartened by some of the people passing off really bad information with questionable credentials. And then I was encouraged too because there are some people out there teaching some really good stuff. I came across a guy and he was teaching about pretexting. Pretexting is the art and science of posing as someone you're not in order to get information. This is something that many investigators are not very comfortable with for a variety of reasons. And it falls into that kind of scary category. This is like with surveillance. Not that surveillance is scary, but anytime you got to leave your office, go out into the real world, that's different from working computer investigations. No problems if you're a computer investigator. If you're a keyboard guy, that's fine with me. Do know that your income is going to be more limited, especially starting out. You kind of need to take a bunch of cases, including surveillance and doing things that do require pretext, either over the phone or in person. I've done a bunch of them. I love them in the sense that you can get great information there, and they're kind of like surveillance. Surveillance is a last ditch thing in my book. If you can't find out the information any other way, then you use surveillance. Same thing with pretext. This kind of becomes a last resort thing for me. I used it a lot during process serving in order to get information about where a skip might be. I used it a lot serving process, posing as flower delivery guy, or a million other things. I teach that in my Investigator's Ultimate Guide to Process Serving, some things that kind of in my section that I call going nuclear, these just above and beyond things. And I don't mean violence. I'm just talking about extreme but legal and ethical methods to get somebody served who skipped out or hiding from you. So this other investigator I saw had a video on pretexting. It was a good video, great stuff. I want to add some things, and maybe he covered one or two of these, but I've got 3 nevers for pretexting, and he laid it out like that, and I thought it was very clever. 3 nevers for pretexting. I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget one, and I want to share them all with you. Number 1, don't pretext as any profession that requires a license. So there's never a question of you practicing that profession without a license. Specifically, like thinking practicing medicine without being a medical license, practicing law without a law license. So don't pose as a doctor for your pretext, a nurse, a lawyer. I just never pose as anything that requires a license. I don't think anything I do, you could possibly say, well, he was kind of practicing medicine or he was doing this. But stepping back a notch and not even pretending to be that profession gives you that extra layer of protection, right? Something to think about there. So how do you do this? I will give you a hint. Put yourself a notch or 2 down, or even at the bottom of the pile. So if you are calling about something, pose as if you are the administrative assistant. Maybe you can pose as someone that's a little bit lower down. And this is really great when you are doing a pretext in a subject you don't know a lot about. I would just say, especially on the phone, they might ask me a question specific about this, and I could just say, I don't know. I got a yellow sticky from the boss. All it says is call and ask about blah, 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 right? So that gets you off the hook. You don't have to be a super expert in the field in order to pretext within that field. Number 2, I never impersonate clergy. This is not a legal thing. It's an ethical thing. Maybe it's a legal thing. I don't know. Don't ever, anybody online telling you something's legal or illegal, be really suspicious about that. They don't know your area, what time it is. Laws are always changing. But just from an ethical point of view, I never pose as clergy when I'm doing a pretext. I never want this person to decide that they want to turn their life around and kind of hesitate before going to a clergy. I want them to feel very comfortable with that no matter what. So number 2, I never pose as clergy. Number 3, this is so obvious. I know you can accept it as a given, but for newbies, one can never perform a pretext that causes real harm. Okay, so for example, if you got to serve process on somebody, you can't trick them into believing they want an all expense paid trip to Las Vegas and they buy tickets, fly to Vegas, you serve them in the airport, haha, sucker, gotcha, but they're never reimbursed. There's some real harm there, right? By the way, when you serve process, you never at the end say, haha, sucker, I got you. Not out loud. Once you get home, you can take a deep breath, everything is done. You can say, okay, you thought you were slick, but I know some things too, and I was slicker in this case. Uh, Way too behind the scenes there for you. If you don't serve process, just to let you know, the bad guys can try their tricks, but we have our tricks as well. But you can't do a pretext that causes real harm. If they're going to end up spending real money, if they're going to be out a day's work, and I don't do any pretext like that, so I struggle a little to come up with examples for that. But really think about, it's different if you knock on somebody's door and you have flowers and it's a flower delivery pretext. If they believe you, there's no real harm there. They're not out any money. They're not out any time. They just had to pause, their bad reality television that they watch and come to the door and not get their flowers and get a subpoena instead. But you cannot do a pretext that causes real harm. Finally, a little bonus tip. I promised you 3. I gave you 3. Let me give you one more. The law firms that you work for, some are going to be, they're like human beings. Some are real loosey-goosey. Some are really wound tight. Some aren't going to care as long as what you do is ethical. Or correction, as long as what you do is legal, they're fine with that. I don't think they're even too hung up on ethical, but that's a big thing for me. Everything's got to be legal and ethical. Other law firms wound very tight. They're very, very concerned that you will reflect poorly on them, and rightly so. Oh my goodness. Process serving tip. Almost the number one thing I can tell you is understand your clients, understand your the law firms that you work for. You reflect upon them. So you may work for one that doesn't mind you going out and doing pretext and skip tracing and finding people and serving them in these kind of crazy ways. There is going to be other law firms that they're going to want you to be that stone cold professional every time. And you should be professional, but they're not going to be, they may not want any pretext at all. And that's not just for process serving. This is for when you're working criminal defense or anything else. Think about, I worked for one law firm, a small firm, one guy. He would not allow any covert recording. That was just a bugaboo for him. No covert recording. Always concerned when this comes up in court, and if it's not settled out of court, it's likely it will go to court. How does that look? Those 12 people on the jury are going to be super creeped out by the fact that you had a pen that was recording the conversation. They're not going to dig on that. They're not going to like that. They may turn on the client because they don't like the methods that you used. And just know your client well. So when it comes to nevers and pretexting, never pretext if the client doesn't want you to be doing pretexting. If you have any nuggets of wisdom about this, especially if you're in the field or maybe you're outside of security and investigations and you have questions about this, drop it in the comments. I'll answer as many as I can. In the meantime, this is Larry K. with ShadowAnyone.com. Remember, do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing.